and all.
Siti, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Siti, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I can hear you.
Ayo. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I can hear you, ma'am.
Priti, can you please talk now?
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Ayo, I'm so sorry. It is not. That time it was coming.
They can hear you, but
Can you speak, Priti?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me now?
later, after half an hour.
Okay.
Yes. 2103. Okay.
A very good afternoon to one and all. Before we start the program, I would like to request all of you to kindly mute your audios and switch off your videos. And if you have any questions or queries at the end of the program, you can please post it in the chat box. And at the end of the program, a feedback form will be posted in the chat box. And I request all of you to fill the forms. Once again, a very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the Internal Compliance Committee of Dayanand Sagar College of Dental Sciences, I welcome all of you for today's webinar on gender sensitization. To brief you about what Internal Compliance Committee is, the Supreme Court of India, in order to eliminate all forms of discrimination and sexual harassment against women, formed a set of guidelines popularly called as Vishaka Guidelines. And as per these guidelines, every institution should have an internal compliance committee for sexual harassment against women in order to make the workplace safe for women. DSCDS also has its own internal compliance committee and is conducting a series of programs on gender sensitization. And today is first of many such programs. Gender sensitization is a process of creating awareness about gender equality. It's a process in which the people of all genders are taught to respect each other, irrespective of gender, while acknowledging the differences. The aim of gender sensitization is to make people aware of the power relation between men and women in the society and to understand the importance of affording men and women equal opportunities and equal treatment. Hence, gender sensitization is considered as a weapon towards gender equality, equal opportunity, and women empowerment, which is essential for creating sustainable development in the society. Many gender sensitization programs are being conducted at household level, organization level, and community levels to attain gender equality and provide healthy working environment for women. It also changes the stereotype mindset that men and women are two unequal entities. So it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Sudeshna Mukherjee. Dr. Sudeshna Mukherjee is presently working as Associate Professor in the Center for Women's Studies, Bangalore University. She has completed her post-graduation, MPhil, and PhD in Sociology with specialization in gender from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Mukherjee is a recipient of the Bureau of Police Research and Development, MHA, Government of India Fellowship in 2001 for her doctoral work. She has completed a number of research and evaluation projects with national and international funding agencies. Dr. Mukherjee has published 2 books and contributed to more than 30 articles in national and international journals and chapters in edited books. In 2015, she was nominated to present the country in the prestigious United States Department of State Bureau of Educational and Current Affairs sponsored International Visitors Leadership Program on the fight against gender-based violence. Dr. Sudeshna was appointed as member coordinator for the drafting committee of the Women's Empowerment Policy for the Government of India in 2016. Ma'am, we are very happy to have you with us, and I now request you to kindly take over.
Thank you, Priti. Very good afternoon. I think you can hear me.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So very good afternoon to one and all present here. So I thank the principal and the staff member of the Dayanand College of Institutions for giving me, especially the dental college, for giving me this opportunity. So today we will be discussing on the, my topic is this understanding gender issues. So when we talk gender, so first thing comes to our mind that what is gender? Because generally in our day-to-day life, we are quite interchangeably use the term gender and sex. So is there any difference or not? So even our the forms we fill up now, that previously we had a sex column, now that is suitably replaced by gender in most of the places. So do these two terms are same, or is there any difference between these two terms? So sex is basically that like being you all are the aspiring doctors, so things are very easy if you understand it in terms of medical terminologies. So it is basically the chromosomal, genital, hormonal and the physical differences that the two sexes are coming between. So we have the, if we go by the sex, we have only the two sexes, masculinity and the femininity, male and female. But especially the sexual differences, we don't bring the other third category here. So that was the limitations of our understanding. But when you talk about gender, gender is a basically culturally specific set of characteristics that identifies the social behavior of woman and man. So basically we say that gender is socially and culturally, constructed. It is not a natural, sex is a natural identity. So we are born with our sexual identity, but gender identity is something which we develop eventually in the course of time. So to give a small example, I tell you that right after a child is born in a hospital, say for that matter, the government, the doctor come out and say that you have a baby boy or you are a baby girl. So immediately you term the name of Fatima or a Krishna. So accordingly, you ascribe religion, you ascribe gender, you ascribe caste, everything to both the child. Same child shaking their legs, you will say, oh my God, this boy is going to be a great footballer. And look at this girl, she is going to be a great dancer. But it is the same children, they are just playing with their foot. So, but we interpret. Immediately you bring pink frock for the girl, blue shirt for the boy. You bring the specific toys for them, for girl definite. And eventually when these children grow up, you have a different school, you have a different, like even you tell them you are a girl, you talk slowly, you talk in a quiet, you don't talk louder. You tell a boy, you go and play football, you run around, you are a boy, you can't cry. So we have a definite sets of behavior which we ascribe. Gender has got nothing to do with this. You don't need your womb to cook. So but we tell women that you cook. You don't require your testosterone or androgen to clean houses or do things in a place, keep things in a place. But we do talk about that. So here comes the importance of gender. So what we do, gender has sex has a very specific roles. So you can say that sex is natural, sex is, you can see that biological, it refers to the visible differences in genitalia, and sex more or less remains constant. And we have the limitation of understanding sex, that it is only male and female. But gender gives us the plethora of opportunities. You can see that when you say gender, we have with us like gender is like a scale. You have two endpoints are fixed. One is the masculinity and another is the femininity. You have a set of values associated with these two things. And you can place yourself anywhere between the scale. So that way you can bring and you can address that entire issue of this third gender, transgender, transsexual. Because in my first slides, you could have seen that so many gender options are available. It is not one masculinity and femininity. There are plethora of opportunities, and only through gender it can be expressed. Gender also talks about that why one gender in a controlling position and another gender is a subordinate position. So it is associated with the subordination of one gender by another gender. Then What is the main reason for this? Like subordination, I mean, that is, we see that quite common. I would like to say some more about the gender, since you are from the medical professions, like how our gender identity is not a natural identity, but it is a constructed identity. When you talk about sex, according to sex, we have only the two specific behavior. One is that men impregnate women, and another is that woman gives birth to the child. These are the nature designated two specific activities, which is sex specific. But rest all what we do, all the gender-based division of labor, stereotypical work, those are all constructed. So you must have heard about this AIS, androgen insensitivity syndrome, where the child is born with the XY, that is, you see that male genotype, the chromosome, but they, because of that insensitivity towards the male hormone, this androgen, so they don't develop those male specific characteristics. They more or less look like the child as a female. So you may have heard about that Shanti Soundararajan. She was one of the very celebrity middle distance runner of India who won the silver medal for India in Doha Asian Games, which held in Qatar in 2006. But after the game, Shanti failed to pass the gender test. So when she failed to pass the gender test, then you see that all the problems began. We say Shanti is imposter, Shanti cheated us. We couldn't understand what was the actual scene. And we discarded Shanti. She tried to commit suicide. She was working as a bricklayer worker. But at the same time, there was Castor Semenya. She is from South Africa. She won. She was also underwent a similar problem, but South Africa government stood by her. They fought a big battle with the Olympic Association of the World International Olympic Association, and they won. And it was found that Semenya was suffering from AIS, that androgen insensitivity syndrome, where the child, when born, the child looked like a girl child, but child is actually genetically a male child. So most of the situation, this poor children, they don't, even in a normal family also, nobody they do the gender testing of a child, genetic testing of the child right after birth. So once the puberty comes, once this menstruation is not there, generally they take it to the doctor. It was found that they're having that AIS problem. But most of these AIS children, though they are genetically men, they live their life like as a woman. So what you see here, they are genetically man, but they were taught to live like a woman. So they generally maintain their life as a woman. So here you see that Shanti also had the same problem, coming from a very poor background. She was not aware of her things. So, but we were so sensitive about these problems that she was very differently treated in our country. And only after the Semenya issue, we started considering more about her. So I'm leaving that issue apart. What I mean to say here, that this androgen insensitivity syndrome is a very good example that even if you have the genetic predisposition as a man, if that child is also reared up as a daughter, she behaves exactly like a daughter. So that gender specific behavior, how we behave like a man or how we behave like a woman, there is nothing natural about. I mean, very limited portion is natural about it. And most of us, it is taught, it is imposed on us. And then the question comes, who imposes this? So here comes this another concept which we call as a patriarchy. Patriarchy is simple terms as a rule of father. So patriarchy is practiced, how patriarchy was created. There were various interpretations. There are religious origin, social origin, economic origin. So very interestingly, if we look at the religious origin of patriarchy, if you think about any religion, most of the religion in the world, they don't recognize the presence of the feminine. So it is feminine is not there. Though in all known species, it is the female species which gives birth to the, who are the responsible for the new life. But you see, very interestingly, on all religion, the creator is a man. God is man. Even in our Hinduism, though many religions, they don't have a feminine presence, Hinduism has a very significant feminine presence. In spite of this, who is creator? Brahma is the creator. Brahma is a man. So significant negation of women's reproductive role is obvious in all the religions. So religion by nature is, patriarchal. It speaks about domination of man. Social origin, we see that society distributing favor any benefits in favor of man than the woman. Economic origin, if you see that, Marx and Engels, you know that they are one of the, persons who talk a lot about the economic inequality and try to give some kind of a solution. So we may agree, we may disagree. That is a different issue. But to them, initially, according to Engels, initially societies were matriarchal society. So now no societies are matriarchal. You may tell me about Khasis in like Meghalaya or Nayars in Kerala. No, they are not matriarchal. The word archi is associated with the power. They are matrilineal or matrilocal. They are no way matriarchal. So probably the matriarchal society ever existed on that early societies where man, woman were in a free relationship and children are known by their mother. So according to Engels, as the concept of private property developed, it is obviously man who took the leading role in acquiring property because women took a backseat because of their reproductive role. So they were not so forwarding in warfare and acquisition and things like that. When the concept of property came, it bring with it is the new concept that after me who will. So in that case, the patriarchy was created to get the control. The man, through creation of patriarchy, they took the control over the reproductive behavior of the woman. So you see that children are not known by their mother, children are known by their father. Though mother take all the pain and all the, maternal mortality rate could be a very significant indicator that how much pain mothers take to give birth. But still children are not known by the mother, they are known by the father. So patriarchy was created. So what patriarchy control? First things that productive labor power of the woman, reproduction, woman's sexuality. Patriarchy decides that who will go out at what time. Moment a rape cases happen, we ask these questions. At that time, what that girl was doing, that was 8 o'clock in the night and she was outside home. So we try to, like if you see that if a dog becomes suddenly, a dog goes rabid, what do you do with the dog? So do you put all human being in the home and allow the dog to roam around? I don't think so we do this. If a tiger become man-eater, we try to catch the tiger. We try to put the, sometimes we put the tiger into silence. But here just other things happen. So if the rape threat is there, you have to put yourself under the cage. Rapist can roam around, harasser can roam around freely. So this is what patriarchy is. So then the control over the property and other economic resources. So look at how much, still most of the country, though they recognize the woman's property right, not more than 2 to 3% of the world's property are owned by the woman. So this is how you see that where we stand. And then we have the plethora of social, cultural, and political institutions, right from family to religion, to educational institution, to cultural institutions, to control, to impose patriarchal values, what women can do, what do's and don'ts, mostly for the woman. Very surprisingly, sometimes you see that collegiate education time to time come up with a dress code. Dress code, only dress code you can talk about the decency. And dress code for all the teachers. But no, dress code only applicable for the women teachers. So a woman teacher who has acquired so much degree, who has studied so much, she does not know how to dress. She needs to be taught that what should be the dress code. But absolutely no dress code for the men folk. So that's where the patriarchal control works. Then we have like, what is our goal? These discussions, even Preeti was talking about the sensitization. Sensitization is the need of the hour. What we are trying to look forward to. Obviously, the common answer you all will give me that gender equality. Gender equality means that men and women, they have the equal conditions for realizing their full human rights. So our constitution is the best example that how a state can grant the gender equality. But by creating a gender equal constitution, have we achieved equality? So this next photograph can help you. Look at the first picture. That is a definite situation of inequality. Then you see when the constitution is created. So that the second picture is talking about the constitution, but still that even after having an equal constitution, even after having an equal sets of rules, one group which are traditionally being subordinated for centuries, there can be discrimination on them. So then we come to the new concept called equity. So you can say our reservation policy is based on the principle of equity. So though maybe it is differing the constitutional mandate of equality, but we are trying to push the group of people who are historically being marginalized, subjugated, their rights were denied. So they need a special push to access. By just practicing equality, you cannot achieve equality. So now we talk about the equity-based proposals where a certain group of people, they need a special push. But we found that is also not enough. Even after practicing reservation policy for 75 years, still we could not get rid of caste. Caste is there everywhere. So we are fighting with this casteist mindset. So what is ultimate goal? So even talk about the gender equality, even after pushing women, still we could push 50% of the reservation in the seats in the local body electorates and in the representatives. But still you look at how women are represented in parliaments, in assembly. Karnataka assembly is one of the poorest in the entire country. We have very, very few women out there. So very interestingly, you see in one of our university seminar, our people's president, President Kalam came. So as usual, like every year, each department, right from computer science to chemistry, to Kannada, to women's studies, to sociology, to visual arts, to dance, every department, women are the topper. They are doing extremely well. So he said that it is giving me immense pleasure to see that so many women are coming out with the flying colors. But then he asked a very crucial question. Where these women go? We don't see them in the boardrooms. We don't see them in the parliament. We don't see them in the office rooms. Where do they go? So this is a very, very crucial question. So our gross enrollment ratio is doing really well in favor of women. In Karnataka, higher education enrollment ratio is higher among the women than the men. But look at the workforce participation. Where do these women go? So this comes it's equality, equity. Nothing is enough. We need justice. So justice, why we need justice? Some more facts you see. These, if we say that why gender sensitization is required, you often may say that there are so many schemes for women, so many things are there for women, there is a equality is given, why they are not coming up? So you see, these are the hard facts before you, that why we need more sensitization, why we need more talk about the gender issues. So look at the labor force participation rate. For men you see, for female you see. Look at the rural-urban distinction, look at all India distinction. So it is 75% for men, 23.7% for the women. Only where women are doing little better, that is life expectancy, because we know genetically women are strong. But look at the child sex ratio. Though we are doing little better on sex ratio per se because of the life expectancy of the elderly woman, they are doing far better because being a doctor, you all know that genetically female child are more stronger than the male child. So even with aged women are doing better. But how many girl child are not allowed to born, or right after birth also they're killed? So our sex ratio, not only in countries, even in Karnataka, child sex ratio that is born to 9 years, that is doing really, really bad. We really need a special intervention to do that. And it is not rural area. In Karnataka, Bangalore, Belgaum, these urban places are doing worse in terms of child sex ratio. Because again, unfortunately, we have to say that some medical fraternity only facilitating the sex selective abortion. So all of us need to be aware of the critical realities. In the places like Chandigarh, like Haryana, Punjab, now there is an acute crisis where eligible men are not getting their brides because they have eliminated all the eligible daughters. So they are getting the daughters from other places. Even in Karnataka, you see that some of the North Karnataka poor villages, there is a popular custom called Gujri marriages. So they call it the bride come from the Gujarat, but it is not Gujarat per se. It is come from Gujarat is also one of the very poor sex ratio states. So it comes from all poor sex ratio state and they just purchase the bride. And very, very unfortunately, it is the name of the bride they take the daughters, but actually they are nothing but the sex slaves. So there are very, very pathetic stories of those girls who married off to all this sex ratio poor states. So anyway, I'm not going much into that details, but look at everywhere, right? From literacy to labor force participation, everywhere you can see, in spite of so much interventions, there is a very high discrimination. Then why this? I mean, why women are not there? Why this pipeline leakage? Like in spite of studying so much, in spite of doing so well professionally, they are not there in the critical positions. So look at these two concepts, that productive labor and the reproductive labor. What is productive labor? Productive labor is that labor that results in goods or services that have the monetary value. So that means the work through which you earn some remuneration. Whereas reproductive work is associated in the private sphere, and that involves anything that people have to do for themselves and family that is not for the purpose of receiving money. It is all associated with care, including the very act of reproduction. So you see, and now you know that there's two kinds of labor and you place the two genders. I mean, you can see that mostly the men are associated with the productive labor force and women are with the reproductive labor force. You can see these pictures on the right side. You can see that there is a board that men at work. So a little child once asked his mother that why these boards are only talk that men at work. Then the mother brilliantly answered, because women work all the time and men work sometimes. So when they work, they put a board like men and work. And women work throughout the 24/7. So they don't need any board. So here you see that this, now we know that what is reproductive labor and what is productive labor. But very interestingly, I give you one small example. Like when reproductive labor becomes productive, women are replaced by men. So I am sounding little difficult, but now I give you one example. Say cooking. In all of our house, mostly now, I mean, post-pandemic, especially that Corona was a great leveler. So many men, Corona taught all these years, all the mothers, sisters, wives, which they could not, Corona did it. That they taught many men how to cook. But still, most of our houses, it is normal situation, it is women who cook. But look at any five-star hotels or any very renowned chefs in the world, or go to any otherwise hotels also. In those places, you will find cooking is predominantly done by the men. Why? Because cooking is remunerative work there. When you cook at your house, there is no remuneration, no recognition, nothing. So it is a thrust on women. But when the same work becomes remunerative and recognizing, women are replaced by the men. So this is also a tendency, any work per se. Look at agricultural work. You see which are the very tedious work which has been given to the woman. If you do the agricultural work, profiling, de-weeding, predominantly done by the woman. Look at the time of the day when women work, when men work. Men work early morning, men work late evening. Women work in the mid of the day, 12 o'clock onwards, after finishing the domestic work. Moment for a particular tedious work, you have a machine. Before that, harvesting used to be done by the woman. But moment harvester came, women were replaced by the men. So moment there is a technology, women are replaced and men take over. So you see that now I give it, this is a Time News survey which was published in 2019. So this gives you a good idea. So mostly, I mean, all are very interesting facts, but look at the red letter ones. So employment related activities. You see, employment related activities means productive labor. Definitely you see that women are much behind. Then you see that unpaid domestic service. Why women are far behind? That answer is there in the third row. So unpaid domestic services for household members. So what is the contribution of man and what is the contribution of woman? So you can see that where women's time, education is being invested. So you see that productive work, the way men are doing, women are not able to do because of the burden of the domestic work. So they are heavily burdened on the unpaid caregiving services in the home. So their works are non-remunerative, non-recognizing works. So now you can see that this is the concept of gender pay gap. Though as per Constitution, as I said, that Constitution gave us equality. It talks about equality among all the citizens in terms of everything, irrespective of sex, religion, caste, any other things. But you see that not only in our country, all over the world, even in the very, very developed countries also, you see that gender pay gap is a reality. You see that this Mithali Raj and Virat Kohli. So you see that how brilliant player Mithali Raj is. But you see that kind of remuneration they receive from the boards. I'm not talking about endorsement. I'm not talking about advertisement, anything. These are the per annum salary given by the cricket board. You see that how the discriminations are being made. Same thing, if you look into the remuneration of the woman film star and the men film star, you will see that. There's a lots and lots of differences. Simple thing, you see that there are certain things, like you say the haircut. I have a very short haircut. My haircut and my husband or my son's haircut, there is not much of difference. But I pay the 4 times charge just because I'm a woman. My haircut will cost more, whereas the men's haircut will cost less. If there is an elaborate work is there, I understand. So these are we call the pink tax. Certain feminine products, which including the sanitary napkins, which was initially placed on the highest bracket of GST. Then after a lot of agitation, persuasion, now government has come down, brought down the GST slabs. So you see, these are though we say that in spite of a lot of women's assertions, feminist movement, the gender pay gap is reducing, but it is still a very, very much reality. And COVID did a havoc. We must acknowledge that these are again, I mean, howsoever we, I mean, reached, it has again, I mean, brought down the level. Then another thing, you see that these are all the bottlenecks in the path of gender equality. That is the gender-based violence. So gender-based violence is a very, very much reality. And you can see that this gender-based violence, one interesting fact about it, that it is omnipresent. It is there in all over the world, be it a developed society, be it a underdeveloped society, be it a tribal society, be it an urban society, be it a rural society, it is there everywhere. And very interestingly, you see that in gender-based violences, that the way women are controlled, the way women are oppressed, so it is much more than whatever is done. So if you see that if I lost a leg in an accident, so that is really a tragic thing. But if I am raped, that is even more tragic. So because society will put lot of other things, or other things will be imposed on me, so which will make there will be no sympathy. You can see that the kind of trials a victim undergoes. So that way you understand that gender-based violence are means to control women. It is basically a threat. So what we say, the young girls, don't go out. There is a fear of harassment, fear of rape, all these things. So here rape is being used as a threat for the mobility, for the aspiration. So if you see that that Bhavri Devi rape case, on the basis of which we got that Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act, the Vishaka guidelines, why Bhavri Devi was raped? Because Bhavri Devi was a government worker. She was a Sathin member, like our Anganwadi workers. So she was trying to stop child marriages, this female feticide in the villages of Rajasthan. So which goes against the interest of the community men. So she was publicly gang raped. So then this entire issue, it is not only the rape, the issue came that Bhavri Devi was a government servant. Howsoever small role she has been assigned, she was doing a societal work assigned by the government. So she was raped in her workplace. So that brought that entire debate, and Bhavri Devi case is still going on. Though we got that, gave a great relief to all the working women in the country, but still she has not got the justice. The main rapist, in fact, he got his natural death in a couple of years back. So global statistics on violence against women show that 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And these all, you remember that these are all tip of the iceberg, because these all are written on the basis of reported cases. And in gender-based violence, reported cases are abysmally low. Violence against women is deep-rooted in unjust and unequal power and gender relations, transcends social and economic boundaries, and affects women and girls of all socioeconomic backgrounds. VOW enters significant social and economic cost. So it is not only the personal cost of the woman's life. In some countries, the violence against women is estimated to cost up to 3.7% of the GDP, which is sometimes double than the country's expenditure on education. Because the moment a woman is raped, she has to be taken to the hospital, the court proceedings, rehabilitations, these all, I'm talking only about rape, there are myriads of things. There are acid attacks, there are harassment, there are trafficking, there are n number of things. There are devdasis, there are yogatis, there are sex workers, there are n number of ways women's dignities are violated. In India, as per the latest National Family and Health Survey, it is not the latest Family and Health Survey of 2015-16, 29.5% of the women have experienced physical violence since the age 15. As per the NCRB 2020 report, on an average of 87 rape cases were registered daily in India. So it is just the registered cases I'm talking about. The number of cases registered 10 times the number, which is more than 10 times sometimes, are not reported again. Women from the poorest of the families are more likely to suffer violence more than those who are from the wealthiest background. In India, parental wealth, but this is a general trend. I'm talking about worldwide trend. But in India also, you find that sometimes parental health are also positively correlated with violence against women, because as this may be used for violence as a tool to extracting more dowry. in addition to initial dowry, if your father has got more money, daughter has to pay the price. So even though we talk about the Kerala as otherwise gender development index wise, it is doing absolutely wonderful. Look at the dowry related violences in Kerala. It is very, 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 very high. So what to talk up, if this is the situation, is the most gender progressive state in the country, then what to talk about the other states? Studies also show that financial autonomy also increases women's risk of violence from their partner. So, which should have been otherwise. In most of the countries, it is seen that your financial autonomy give you power to call it a quit in the relationship, but many a time it calls for further violence because again that male ego, inferiority complex, this all comes. Studies also show that financial autonomy also increases women, as per McKinsey study, violence against women is holding back India's economy. Creating a safe environment for women may increase GDP by $770 billion. So the trillion economy we are talking about, if we can control gender-based violence, very easily we can reach that trillion mark economy. So that's why gender sensitization is so very important. There are different parameters, like I'm sure Preeti will hold one more session for you with somebody on this entire issue of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is such a mammoth issue, and it can be done in such varied manner that all of us need to be aware of. Then now I just would like to run you through a brief aspects of what are the commitments of the Indian state towards the gender equality. We have constitutional mandates, legal provisions, public policies, and public expenditure. These are generally 4 ways the Indian state tries to do it. So constitutional mandate, we have the Article 14, equal rights and opportunities in political, economic, and social sphere. Article 15, prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of sex. Article 15.3, that enables affirmative discrimination in favor of women, that is this principle of equity. Article 39, equal means of livelihood and equal pay for equal work. Article 42, just and human conditions of work and maternity relief. Article 51, A and E, that is fundamental duty to renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women. Then we have the key legislations with the gender perspective. Very recent one is important is this Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, that is post Nirbhaya on the basis of the recommendations of the Verma Commission Act. This amendment sought to make provisions relating to violence against women more stringent. New offenses like acid attack, sexual harassment, voyeurism, disrobing of women, stalking, these are now included in the penal code with enhanced punishment. Definition of rape has been changed, that it includes both penetrative and non-penetrative sex as a rape. So then we have the sexual harassment of the woman at workplace, that is 2013, that Vishakha judgment we have. Then right to children, free and compulsory education, National Employment Guarantee Act, Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act 1994, the prohibition of child marriage 2006. But you see that how the situations always disproportionately affect women. Post-COVID, we see a very significant rise in child marriage because families are finding it difficult to take care of the schools in the absence of schools, midday meals. So they thought it is very easy for them to get rid of their paraya dhan by getting her married. So not only in the country, even in the Karnataka also, there is a significant rise on the child marriage post-COVID scenario. Then we have the Protection of Women from the Domestic Violence Act, Equal Remuneration Act, Dowry Prohibition Act, Maternity Benefit Act. So you see, we are a country, we have no dearth of good legislations and a constitutional provision. You name a problem, we have enacted a legislation to solve that. But there is a gap. In sociology, there is a term called LIP. So where your material culture and non-material culture, they don't match. So what happened that our legal system, our constitutional system, they are way ahead of the society. The kind of thinking they are perceiving that has not reached, or we can say that we educated section, we have not taken enough initiative, or we ourselves are not much aware of our role and how we can be instrumental in implementing this thing. So there is a huge implementation gap. So we have no dearth of good legislation, but again, implementation is very poor. So this is a basic structure. You can see that how the things are. So legislation, that is Parliament Committee for the Empowerment of Women. Then we have the policy, which are mostly come through the Women and Child Development. There are implementation authorities and the authorities at the state, district, block, and the village level. So you can see that respective workers. And then we have the statutory bodies like National Commission for Women and the State Commission for Women, who are, supposed to be responsible for the upholding of the women's rights in the national and the state. But we know that how they function, how they are often plagued by the politics. So there is no point in talking about that. Then one more interesting part before finishing this, I would like to talk to you about that gender budgeting. So any policy, any plan, it makes no sense unless and until it is supported by the budget. If I can talk about 100 policies, but if I don't have the supported budget, matching budget, like post-Nirbhaya, creation of one-stop crisis center was in each district, was the mandate of the government. But they only allocated some 5 crore for that. For entire India, each district having a one-stop crisis center, 5 crore is nothing. But it amounts to zero. So like this, every year, if you see, there are hundreds of schemes are being announced, but how much budgetary allocations are being made for them, that is very, very crucial for success of any policy. So now Government of India from 2007, they started this gender responsive budgeting. So gender responsive budget acknowledges the gender pattern in society and allocates the financial supports to make policies and programs gender equitable. So as we say that to make equality, to realize equality, you should push equity. So gender responsive budgeting is one of such equity pushing factors. So more specifically, it refers to systematic gender differentiated impact of fiscal provisions, programs, and policies. Gender budgeting has been recognized as a tool with potential to directly promote women's development and empowerment through allocation of resources for women-oriented programs and schemes. It entails identifying and reflecting needed interventions to address gender gaps in sectors and local government policies, plans, and budget. So now we'll see that how gender budgeting can be done. So gender budgeting can be undertaken as a specific exercise of the government, separated from its standard budgetary procedures. Often it is done like that. It can be fully integrated in a centralized way, perhaps by the budget department in the Ministry of Finance. That is the ideal way it should be done, because Ministry of Finance always hold the maximum control over the other ministries. But often this gender-specific budgeting is done through the Women and Child Development, that WCD ministries. And you know that that ministry is generally a very weak ministry. That is not always, sometimes some strong ministers give that ministry a strong face. So otherwise, this ministry cannot control Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Defense to make their budgets gender inclusive. So, but now the very crucial question comes that can it be only done by the government? Absolutely not. It can be a practice, can be done by any authorities who are doing budgeting, including us. All of us in a limited manner, we also have to do the budgeting in our homes. So any institutions, I know that Harvard University started the gender budgeting procedures. So you try to see, you try to see your budgetary expenditure in a comparative fashion, allotment and expenditure, like how much money you have earmarked for each categories. and how much you would expect your expenditure is. From your expenditure, how a particular category is getting benefited out of it. So these are very, very crucial practice in a limited way. All of us can, in our parameters, even including within our departments also, we can do it because we have a limited head of budget. So it just need a gender lens. So gender budget put a gender lens in front of you through which you can see that how you are implementing, how are your action plans are being made. I talked too much about the gender budgeting, so now you must have been thinking that it is being done in a great way by our governments. So I give you this next 2 slides will give you my initiative in a small way to show you what is the percentage of gender budgeting in the national budget and also in the state budget. You see that it never crossed beyond 5.91%. That was highest in 2012-13. It's coming down. It is not even the 5% of our budget. Not even the 5% of our total budget. So you can see as per the 18 and 19, among the 49 departments, only 38 departments has some gender budgeting initiative or not. Whether the government of India mandate asks for every department to have the gender budgeting protocol. But in spite of 38 departments implementing gender budgeting, in spite of having a full-fledged woman and child department, we have only 4.99% earmarked for the gender budget. Now you will see that Karnataka. Karnataka is like in any budgetary statement, you have 3 categories: category A, category B, category C in gender budget statements. So category A are having 100% schemes are for the woman, or you have the category B is the 30 to 99% of the total beneficiaries are women, and whereas the category C where less than 30% beneficiaries are the women. So 100% women beneficiary specific schemes are only 3% on 17-18 and only 2.23% in the 18-19 of the Karnataka budget. These all are data I am taking from the government websites only. Then category B, where the beneficiary ranges from 30% to 99%, that is 11% or 12%. And category C, where the women beneficiaries are less than 30%, so that is the 86% or 85.8%. So majority of the department where you can see that we don't even mark the critical minimum number of the women beneficiaries. So then we need that for our policymakers to understand the gender need, because our policymakers are quite a gender blind. So they have no idea about the concept called the gender need. So when we talk about this, Caroline Mosier, a famous economist who talked about this distinction between practical gender need and the strategic gender need. So what are these practical gender needs? Practical gender needs are generally women are identified in their socially accepted roles in the society. They do not challenge, although they arise out of the gender division of labor and women's subordinate participation in the society. So practical gender need are basically the need of the family, but women are responsible to meet out this. So maybe I'm sounding a little abstract. I give you a small example. Things will be much easier for you to understand. Say, think about a village where there is no regular source of drinking water. So women walk the kilometers to fetch water. So every day they walk maybe 10 kilometers to fetch a pot of water. So now in this particular village, you brought the potable, water, you have a borewell or some water sources. So now what is the changes? Now it's really good. Women need not go such far away. They have water in front of their house. So it reduces their labor. But does it change their role? They were bringing the water. They are also bringing the water. So most of our policies in this fashion, just because the tap has come nearby, men is bringing water, it is not happening. See Ujjwala scheme. You are giving gas cylinder to make the woman's life little better. So all practical gender needs are in such fashion. You give her microwave, you give her from the chula to you give her gas stove. So you give her washing machine, it is just to reduce her labor, but not to replace her. You are not telling her, okay, now the work is less, I will manage it, you go and study, you go for job, you discontinue the education, you do it. So these changes it is not talking about. So most of the government intervention, most of the interventions otherwise also, you see that is in a practical gender need orientation. It meets the practical needs and it doesn't question the existing structure of the power distribution. Whereas we should, if we are talking about gender equity, gender equality, gender justice, we should talk more about the strategic gender need. Strategic gender need are what? That women realize this because of the subordinate. They realize their subordinate position. They understand their oppressive situation. These things include issues like legal rights, rights against domestic violence, equal wages, women's control over their own body. So these are these sensitization workshop, these are one of the way of meeting the strategic gender need. So strategic gender need includes abolition of sexual division of labor, alleviation of the burden of domestic labor and child care, removal of institutional forms of discrimination such as right to own land or property, access to credit and other resources, freedom of choice over childbearing, measures against gender-based violence, participation in decision making, so whole range of things. So moment policy promotes these decisions, the policy promotes this need, we are moving more towards a gender equal society. So aware, sensitize, awake, and empower. Empowerment is not only the woman's empowerment. Empowerment is a wholesome process. Both men and women need to be empowered. Often we go to these empowerment sessions and we see only women are sitting. They know unless and until we have the other groups, they become aware, sensitized, and they are awake about the problems of the another group, real change will not come. So thank you. I'm finishing here and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that wonderful session and for making us aware of so many gender issues. Ma'am, we have one question by Adil Saif. Ma'am, can you listen? Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, Kriti.
Yeah, there is one question, ma'am. Is there a way that can difference be created at the ground level in terms of awareness on gender bias, gender equality, and gender indifference?
So ground level means you are talking about the rural people or like what?
Ma'am, the question is just at the ground level.
Ground level. So, I mean, the sensitization programs are very, very important and we need more sensitization of men now. I think women are quite sensitization. They need more of an awareness program about their rights and benefits. So now the sensitization is more needed for the men. So I prefer to do sensitization for the men and boys and for more of an awareness program for the women.
Yes, ma'am. Very
so
true.
This is going to be a good tool.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Any other questions from the participants? You can even mail us. Your question will be forwarded to ma'am and a reply will be mailed to you. And I also request all of you to kindly fill the feedback forms. Thank you very much, ma'am, again. And I now request Dr. Savita AM, Chairperson of Internal Compliance Committee, Dayanand Sagar College of Dental Sciences, to present vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Good afternoon once again. Thank you, Dr. Sudesha Mukherjee, for very informative presentation and definitely making each of us to understand the, I would rather say as a basic discrepancies and problems which are associated with gender issues. Many at times we just think of only the male or the female, but there are so many other issues which you have been really listed out very nicely in your PPT. Thank you, ma'am. And I would also, on behalf of our management, DSI and our principal, Dr. Hemant, and our faculty and the other auxiliary staff members and our dear students, I would render my sincere thanks to you for accepting my invitation and definitely sensitizing us towards the gender bias, the equality, the policies, and other budgeting. I think which is a bit, we need more of homework to understand that. And thank you once again, ma'am. And definitely hope to collaborate with you in our future programs. Thank you. And I also would like to thank my AV team for the wonderful support, and also our partner, DS from our DSI, for conducting this program smoothly. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I once again thank all the participants for your active participation and kindly fill the feedback forms. Thank you very much again.
So Preeti, I think I can leave the meeting now.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Savita. Thank you so much.
Hello, sir, Imtiaz sir, can you hear me? Hello.